Hello everybody, I'm Jeff, and we're going to be talking about Shadowrun Hong Kong, an isometric CRPG. Welcome to Hong Kong 2056, where you'll be returning to seek out a dear old friend that was abandoned so long ago in your pursuit of a far-reaching career. But family, as they say, is indeed important. The cyberpunk atmosphere is very strong here, with a strong fantasy component that newcomers to the series might not necessarily be ready for. But it is here indeed. Anyway, it's a very interesting and coherent story regardless of any sort of, fantastical element that you may not necessarily be expecting once you get into it. However, and it has plenty of explanation for all the specific lore and the mythos you might not have played in the other Shadowrun games. The beginning is at once a tutorial for the turn-based mechanics, as it is also a primer for the chaos that's about to consume a few days of your life. And trust me, so long as you sit back, prepare for a wild ride and give it a chance, give it an actual good college try, you'll be very grateful that you did. Shadowrun Hong Kong is an exercise in patience that just might pay off in spades. Maybe. Now, Shadowrun Hong Kong is very much an RPG as much as it's a turn-based combat game. Isometric, text-heavy, and filled with interesting characters and despots that all want to kill you. It's a very fun premise on the surface, and it weaves a glorious story that takes you on an adventure of a lifetime. Now, your foster father disappears after sending a message that you have to come and meet him in Hong Kong. It's desperate, it's urgent that you come and meet him, according to the message. Now, the circumstances are mysterious, of course, and the plot becomes even thicker once you arrive. Your brother Duncan? He meets you at the docks, eager to find your father, but also eager to slam you with 15 pages of text explaining the backstory. And of course, it also helps to orient you to your surroundings. Quite frankly, the entire game seems more suited to be in some other sort of literary form, say, perhaps maybe a book. Because the writing itself is expertly done, the dialogue well thought out, but in perhaps a different medium, would it thrive even more than it does here? Because it drags on, and on, and on, and on, and on, and on, for what seems like an eternity. There's just so much dialogue and text to run through here, that it kind of gets a little bit boring. You just click through it after a while. You don't really want to read it. Sure, it's great, but I want to play a game. I don't want to read a game. But I digress. This is most definitely a text-based game that describes every little detail to you. It isn't necessarily a terrible trait by any real means, but just be prepared to take a lot of time, even if you're a fast reader, to go through this dialogue. Of course, you could always just click through it as well. That's what a lot of people do. Quite frankly, that's what I do haphazardly sometimes, because it gets to you. There's a lot of it. But it is good to actually delve into it, because it does explain quite a bit, and it is well written. You might like it. The plot and the story really draw you in here, and do help you to enjoy this game a lot more, despite being overly text-based. It's an epic, Chosen One-esque type storyline that really, fits well here with this particular game. You're thrust into this role unwillingly, of course, and you have to follow the lead of your friends and some newly met colleagues along the way to try to uncover a vast mystery, as well as avoid getting captured now that you're inevitably a fugitive, as tends to happen. I suppose the previous Shadowrun games were a little bit more guided, a little bit more easier to go along. They sort of showed you everything. They guided you along those objectives. They kind of held your hand a little bit and presented you a mostly, linear type of gameplay. You do these objectives, well thought out story objectives, mind you, but you do these objectives and then you complete the game. Shadowrun Hong Kong, on the other hand, sort of gives back the player their freedom of choice. It doesn't really force you into anything once you're in the middle. The only thing that it forces you to do is do the beginning mission, which is actually quite fun, and the ending mission. But aside from that, that big, gigantic area in the middle, that's up to you. And of course, in that, there's a lot of different side quests and different jobs that you can do to make your character, better for that final confrontation. And there is a lot to do, but the problem is that it doesn't necessarily feel like a coherent part of the whole. Those side missions and those different quests don't necessarily have to do with the main story itself. And at times it can actually feel kind of aimless. And quite frankly, the pace can feel downright achingly slow. But there are good. There's a lot of good in this. The combat itself is not quick, but it is fun. And certainly you're not going to win any prizes for taking out enemies quickly. And in fact, in one of the combat sequences, it sees you barely able to hit the enemy without struggling to not die because it's so difficult in the beginning because you're so weak as a character, as a protagonist. But the battles themselves, they really are an exercise in patience, fun though they may be, but you do have to be patient in your ability to kill these enemies quickly. And that action, though, it really is varied enough from one sequence to another to be quite exciting. The weapons, the abilities, etc. that you use in all of these combat sequences, still quite fun. So despite the copious amounts of well-written dialogue, it still doesn't feel nearly as deep as past Shadowrun games. The characters are far from forgettable, but they aren't nearly as developed as you'd like. You sort of want to see them more. You want to see more backstory. You just want to see, well, quite frankly, more. And you don't get that. But the pages upon pages of interactions only go so far into giving insight into the minds of our protagonists. It's not fair, and it's definitely not enough. However, Shadowrun Hong Kong is a better isometric CRPG than most. And regardless of what might seem to be a relatively short main story with an emphasis on the middle portion of the game for fun, it still shines through as a great isometric CRPG. The novel use of abilities that have a real and significant impact on your action is just great. It really does help. The best part is that you can use decking, which is a handy hacking mechanism, that's what they call it in this game. It actually works well, and you can use that to avoid a lot of different conflict out there by using the pseudo-cyberpunk hacking technique. Very useful, very fun. The story might be convoluted at times, but it's still polished, and it is enjoyable to read through. The emphasis on read. The combat mechanics are also much refined over the past, making Shadowrun a fantastic game in its own right. Just beware of the slow, self-starting pace and having to read, through a novel or two. So this game is actually a lot of fun. Shadowrun Hong Kong, an isometric CRPG for those that enjoy the genre, or for those that want to read a really good book. I'm Jeff, Wccftech Reviews.